Welcome to my channel. This is Amy, and I am so happy that you are with me today. And I have just loved all the comments and all the encouragement, and I love the interactions. And so, thank you so much for all the comments. I enjoy hearing from you and talking with you. And so, for today's video, it is the book of Zephaniah. And Zephaniah prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem that occurred in 586. Now, when he prophesizes this, only 20 years later did that occur. And I enjoyed Zephaniah greatly, and I got to use butterflies, and I made it beautiful, even in the midst of so much destruction. And so he prophesizes a global destruction comparable to Noah's day and reversing the order of creation. And so that is at the very beginning of this book. And then also, it is talking here about Baal. And I've studied it a little bit from the book of Revelation, and that is the Phallic cult. And the Phallic cult, it's kind of crazy, usually ends up as some sort of human sacrifice, but it always is going to start off with something like this. The believer hears accurate Bible doctrine, but he rejects God's provision for him in time. And so the scar tissue begins to accumulate on the soul of this believer, and it kind of like a vacuum is created into which false doctrine is drawn. The result is kind of like an emotional revolt of the soul, and it results in soul slavery. And so here in the book of Malachi, I was thinking about this, and I'm going to flip to Malachi really quickly. I think I hope you want to hear this. So just give me a sec here. And so, what all these minor prophets are stating, all the ones we've talked about thus far, there is a historical principle that is born out in the rise and fall of nations. So, this principle is that no nation ever becomes enslaved first until that nation undergoes that emotional revolt of the soul. So it's soul slavery. And so soul slavery can be reversed by Bible doctrine. And so that is what leads to physical slavery. And so here we know exactly what they're into. They are in the Phallic cult with Baal. We also know that they are into, let's see, some Molech, and I don't know as much about that as I do about Baal. I know just a very little on that. And there is a pseudo trinity. There is a resurrection. And I think Baal was married to his sister, something along those lines. And I think her sister goes by many names. I think it's Ashtar, many other names, maybe even Venus, Aphrodite. And so that what was going on. And then after Zephaniah prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem, he goes right into the day of the Lord. And so the day of the Lord is the second advent. And if you are unsure about what that means, I would encourage you to learn about that. The Old Testament saints knew of this. I covered that a little bit in Joel. And so let me flip to that really quickly. I can give you a few extra pointers on that. And so the day of the Lord gives an analogy that sets up perfectly the day which Christ returns to the earth. It is a day of darkness. And this day of darkness covers and protects the born-again believers who are resisting the invaders in the siege of Jerusalem. Now, just as sort of an introduction, if you do not know what that is, I've got a very simple timeline. So this is where we are, the church age. The next prophecy is the rapture. The only prophecy in our time right now is the rapture. Then there is 7 years of tribulation. And then the Lord comes back there's a battle of Armageddon taking place in Jerusalem. And so we have the second advent, then the millennium for 1,000 years, last judgment, and then the eternal state. Okay, so the book of Zephaniah doesn't really tell anything too new about the second advent. Zephaniah prophesied in the days of King Josiah, and somehow he was related. Um, he was a great grandson of King Hezekiah, and that did make him a relative of King Josiah. Now, what is so interesting about young King Josiah? Yep, he was a king of Judah around the age of 8. And he was so determined to learn more about God. And this is what I find to be so fascinating, that he had a priest clean up the temple. And lo and behold, they found the book of law in the temple. And it just reminds me of a verse in James where it says, when you seek out the truth, when you're looking for doctrine, you're looking for that content, there's a responsibility on God's part to provide that to you. And so, what I find most interesting about Josiah is that he went in there and he tore down the altars of Baal. He destroyed all the foreign incense altars. He burned the bones of the false prophets. He broke the carved images and molten images in pieces. And so he had a set of reform. And it's very interesting because I believe it was his dad. I should probably go back and check that. And who was so very wicked and so very evil. And I believe the king after was as well pretty wicked. But here we've got Josiah. And so I found the story of Josiah very, very interesting. I actually did a kids lesson on Josiah, and I learned so much. I love kids curriculum. And I think I might do a video on the best Bible curriculum I've ever found in teaching kids, and I used it for many, many years and had my kids on that as well. And so you get to learn some really interesting things through a kids study. And so here is just my quick, simple chapter outline on a post-it note that kind of matches. And then I love the polka dot washi tape. And then I did an additional stripe of these butterflies and flowers to kind of jazz up the book of Zephaniah. And in chapter 2, the judgment of God upon surrounding nations. And we learn from the book of Obadiah that God does judge individual nations. Nobody goes unchecked, and same with individuals. And so all that is pertaining basically to our attitude regarding the Word of God, which is a decision to make daily. And so then we have lastly in chapter 3 was really fun. I kind of made up this little butterfly compass, and this is the judgment, God's coming judgment upon the nations that surround Judah. And so they were going to be held accountable. So we have Assyria to the north. We talked about Assyria in the last book, Nahum in order. Assyria got knocked out, taken out. Now, before all this judgment talk and all this bad news, I just want to share with you some encouragement. If your attitude towards Bible doctrine is positive, you are studying, you are note taking, you are positive, you're getting hungry, you want it, just like King Josiah. There is a promise to those who do not serve Satan, who remain in fellowship, who do not seek after the worldly things, And basically, what I'm trying to say is every single book in the Minor Prophets talks about a remnant. So I just wanted to encourage you that even if a nation goes down, there is a place of security and safety for a remnant. Now, a remnant, the easiest way I can explain that is that they are working out God's plan. They are in fellowship with the Lord. They are almost like a beacon of hope, of light, even if there's very few of them. Now, the result of them being very few is the reason why the nation goes out. And so, if you put it all together, a nation does take itself out. And if you see a lot of the politics today, everyone is blaming everybody else for everything. And I would say the conservatives are very guilty of this, and they'll go in and say it's the liberals. And what it technically is, what it is that the house of Judah will be judged first. The believers. The believers grow a nation historically with the uptrend of taking in the word of God, or they get out of God's will, God's plan. They are in the Philip cult. They're in some sort of religion, and they are part of the downward trend. So in chapter 3, we have the millennial kingdom. So Israel's shame will be transformed into praise and renown. And so the millennial kingdom, it's going to last for 1,000 years. Jesus Christ will reign and rule. Now, there's so much with the millennial kingdom that I encourage you to learn more about this event. This is what the second advent brings in, is the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to wrap up this book